Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. I'm Jessica McKay, and I'm the Director of Customer Success for Embedded Refills. I've been on the embedded team for about 3 years now and worked in the healthcare field for the last 7, managing ambulatory clinics. I'm very excited to share with you how embedded refills can help your organization streamline the medication refill process today.
And hi, my name is Emily Rodriguez, and I'm the Director of Technical Success for Embedded Refills. I've been with the Embedded Refills team for the last 5 years. Prior to that, I was an Epic analyst over various modules for over 10 years with a healthcare organization in Wisconsin. I have spent a lot of my career improving the EMR experience for clinicians, and I can't wait to talk to you about the implementation process of embedded refills. So a quick overview of our agenda today. We're going to go over today's challenges with medication refills, discuss our solution, embedded refills, review the implementation process, and then finally go over the post-life support structure as well as data. Before we get started, we wanted to have a few poll questions for the audience. First, on average, how many minutes does it take to refill medication at your organization? Would that be 1 to 3 minutes, 4 to 7 minutes, or over 8 minutes? Okay, we'll give it about 10 more seconds. Okay, so we have a almost even split here. Looks like the majority are doing within 1 to 3 minutes, and that's fantastic. For those of you that are processing in 4 or more minutes, hopefully you'll learn a lot today about how embedded refills could help your organization. Moving on to our second poll question. Who completes the majority of refills at your organization? Would that be the providers, pharmacists, or perhaps medical assistants, registered nurses, or pharmacy techs? All right, we're going to give it about 10 more seconds. Okay, and definitely overwhelming majority is having that medical assistants, registered nurses, or pharmacy techs fill refills. That's really great. That tells us that staff are already used to refill delegation. Okay, so I'm going to hand it over to Jessica, who's going to discuss the challenges that people face today with medication refills.
All righty. Thank you, Emily. First, we have the impact on staff and providers. As you can see, there's a lot of redundant clinical work happening, an average of 4.5 minutes spent per renewal request for a pharmacist to manually review a patient's chart to ensure that they have the appropriate lab tests and office visits to safely refill medications. It's critical yet labor-intensive work, as you want to complete refills as quickly as possible, but also ensure safety and quality is a focus. I think everyone would agree that provider time is valuable, and these repetitive tasks take away time from direct patient care. As for the impact on patients, over 22% of patients do not receive recommended lab monitoring for adverse medication effects. They also often have long turnaround time on their prescription renewal requests. And when you need a refill and you do not have quick access, or you end up going a few days without a medication due to slow processing times, that really adds to a poor patient experience. When it comes to the impact on information services, we found that it takes approximately 10 hours to build one protocol. That's thousands of hours to build commonly prescribed medication protocols. And in addition, the content included in those protocols must be maintained and updated, which is something that tends not to occur, resulting in a lack of trust in the protocols. So it takes a lot of resources, expertise, and time to take this on. And that is where embedded refills comes in. Embedded refills provides decision support to providers and refill staff by summarizing data from the patient chart and preparing actions and identifying gaps in care. It leverages patient-level data, complex medication protocols, and EMR workflows to automate tasks associated with medication refills. It saves time by having customized protocols directly embedded into the EMR, reduces risk because when a refill is requested, the protocol will trigger and it will look for any care that is due and any medication requirements. And it drives efficiency using these standard workflows supported by robust protocols, enabling your staff to efficiently work to top of license. It starts with consensus. So this is provider alignment on clinical rules that drive protocols for your patient population. It ensures everyone's following the same processes and the same best practices when it comes to refilling medications. Next, we have delegation. This allows staff to refill on behalf of the provider, enabling them to work to top of license while still maintaining high patient safety standards, rather than solely relying on a provider to do so. And then we have the implementation. We embed these agreed upon standardized protocols right into your EMR, driving efficiency and effectiveness. Lastly, we have optimization, using data-driven results to see your progress so you can continue to expand to additional specialties, ultimately achieving a higher ROI. And we have another poll question here. What percentage of your organization uses medication refill protocols? We have 0 to 25, 25 to 50, 50 to 75, and 75 to 100. Alrighty, let's give it another 10 seconds here. Great, alrighty. We have a pretty good mix of results here, from 27% and some way up higher to the 75 to 100%. So for those that have a lower percentage, we're going to chat more about medication protocols and how beneficial they are to the refill process. Alrighty, let's define what a protocol is. So it's essentially a decision support framework that utilizes content about the medication that will flag if something pertinent is missing. For instance, before we refill a specific medication, we want to make sure that we've had an office visit in the last year, that we've monitored blood pressure, and that we've completed a certain lab test. Those are just a few examples of what could go into requirements of a protocol. We deploy embedded refills across a spectrum, whether that's a pharmaceutical class or medication class, the type of medication all the way down to a single medication, single route. Also, we currently have a medication library. It's maintained by a clinical content manager, and it provides protocol recommendations for over 950 meds. We can support both primary care and most specialties on the same protocol set. And these are some of the requirements that I was speaking about. Embedded refills is built to look for lab tests, vitals, images or procedures, questionnaires and assessments like the PHQ-9s, specific documents, and even quality measures like health maintenance topics. And that is the great thing about embedded refills. It eliminates the need to look through the chart manually. Here's a few examples of protocol build for diabetes medications. First, we have metformin and metformin combos. This protocol requires a creatinine, an office visit, an EGFR, and an A1C in a certain time period, as well as a manual review message. A manual review message provides additional information that is for review when there's non-discrete requirements that need to be checked. They can also be custom messages added by your organization. Then we have an example in the middle. This one is looking for a creatinine, an A1C, and an office visit within a certain time period. And lastly, for diabetes supplies, it's more simple, straightforward, only requiring a visit within a certain time period. Let's take a look at what an embedded refills message looks like. I want to preface this as we do not have a user interface, so the following slides are a general mock-up of what our protocols look like. The refill message will display in your EMR. The goal of our integration today is just to give you a view of how we look as if you were a provider or a staff member completing a refill. There are a few different bucket categories that refills can fall into. First, we have in protocol here. After a renewal request comes in for a patient, maybe that's phoned in, faxed in, or e-prescribed, then a refill protocol is applied. When in protocol, that means the medication requested meets all parameters of the protocol. And this is when many of our clients will delegate from provider to a staff member so they can go ahead and approve that refill. As you can see in the highlighted section here, we're in the in basket. This refill has a status of in protocol. And if you review the notes section lower in the screenshot, it shows this is a refill for Lipitor 20 milligrams. We recommend you refill it for 2 months, which is when the next patient appointment is. And then we call out the last qualifying office visit, the next scheduled visit, the last refill date with refill details and labs associated. We train to work from the in basket, so there's no need to jump over to that encounter as all of the information you need is right here. Less clicks, less time reviewing the chart. Now, not all renewals will meet all requirements, and here's an example of an off-protocol request. Before we go live with clients, we have a subsection of what we refer to as non-delegated protocols. These are medications you define as an organization that you do not want a staff member to sign off on. These meds are not attached to a protocol, but they will trigger an off-protocol message, and that will tell you it needs to be forwarded to the provider. The goal is for these to automatically go over to the provider while still ensuring that the appropriate chart review that you requested during protocol consensus is completed before it gets to the provider, so they can then quickly and safely refill the medication. Next, we have out of protocol. In this example, the medication requested does not meet the protocol due to an overdue office visit or overdue or abnormal labs. It calls out HDL, LDL, total cholesterol, and triglycerides are overdue, that they were last performed 16 months ago, when the protocol calls for every 12 months. It also notes the triglycerides are abnormal, and it shows the actual lab value and the range. Typically, our clients will provide a courtesy renewal and give the patient some time to come back to be seen once those labs are done. And then we have the active med list check med errors. This is checking the integrity of all incoming requests. In this example, the medication was set to discontinued, so we would want to call that out in our workflow. Another common example is the request is not on the active medication list, or it is on the active medication list, but at a different strength than what the requested by the pharmacy. And before we go live, we see on average about 10 to 15% of volume being duplicate requests. So we want to flag these duplicates. We define duplicates as a signed order that was completed within the last 7 days, or the patient should have refills left on their previous prescription, or that it's a true duplicate of another request. And in this example, under the notes section, you can see that the Lipitor was filled and it shows the date of November 11th. Okay, another poll question. What is the average turnaround time for a requested refill to be completed at your organization? Alrighty, we'll give it about 10 more seconds. Alrighty, great. So we're seeing right at 24 and 48 for our participants today. Thank you. I'm going to hand it back over to Emily so she can provide an overview of our implementation process.
All right, thanks, Jess. So the implementation process has 5 different phases. Our first phase is the initiation phase. This is where all of our stakeholders align and we define those roles and responsibilities for the stakeholders. The project team is also organized at this time, and that is typically all of our IT resources that will be involved. Then we move to the planning phase. This is where we can jump into the design and content of the protocols. We gather all of the different requirements for the protocols, such as those labs or office visit requirements. And then we also go over our operational processes. How are we going to accomplish this work successfully? Finally, we go over the integration specs, sharing that information with the IT team so that they're able to prepare for the build ahead of them. From there, we move on to the execution phase. And this is my favorite phase because it's our busiest phase when we really get a lot of the work done. This is where we do the build, testing, training, and ultimately the go live. The IT team works together with the embedded refills team in order to do all of the configuration and the build. We also test the build for connectivity as well as the content. We have our user training so that the end users can be prepared to use the product, and we establish our go live date for pilot sites and execute that go live. From there, we can move on to the monitoring phase, and this is where we move into post go live support. We establish our check-ins with end users and focus on any issues, concerns, comments, or feedback that they may have regarding embedded refills. Finally, we move to the closing phase. This is when the implementation is completed and it's time to transition to maintenance. The embedded refills team, however, is not going anywhere after the implementation. We are here to support beyond the go live. Once a customer is live, we continue to assist with any requests as well as protocol updates. Protocol updates are provided both by our team, but also could be customer specific. We also do workflow optimization. If issues with turnaround time with the refills, for example, we might shadow one of the end users to determine where the issue lies. Are the staff still chart searching too much and not relying on the protocols, for example? Finally, we have an analytics dashboard that the team will be able to use in order to look at the details behind their protocol turnaround. So there's different stakeholders that are required for the embedded refills implementation. Having the right stakeholders involved is imperative to the success of implementing embedded refills. First, we have our executive sponsor, and this is a senior member of the health system who directs the team to deliver the project and champions the cause. This is someone who has authority to make system-wide decisions. They're continually involved in the project, especially with defining it, and they're actively engaged in reviewing the progress and ongoing success after the implementation. Then we have our provider champion. This is someone who is a liaison between providers who will benefit from embedded refills and the project team that is doing the implementation build. They're our point of reference on how things are done from a clinical perspective, and they're also knowledgeable on how prescribing providers need the product and the workflow to function. They keep our providers and end users up to date on the progress of the project, and they're responsible for maintaining the clinician buy-in. Now, it's not uncommon for providers to be apprehensive when embedded refills is implemented, and they may even be resistant to changing their workflow. So this person is vital to help sway that opinion. Then we have our nursing or pharmacy champion. And depending on a customer's organization structure and the desired refill design and who will be filling these refills, a nursing or a physician champion will be appropriate for this role. This is a person who is an also respected leader and understands clinical workflows and can inspire and embrace change. They're crucial for buy-in from end users that will be doing the refill work and using embedded refills technology. So as you can see, both the provider champion and the nursing and pharmacy champion are vital in order to gain that trust with users and the embedded refills product. Then we have our operational project sponsor. This is often the same person as the nursing or the pharmacy champ, or they could be somebody like an optimization specialist that already works as a liaison between clinicians and the IT department. This person helps maintain open communication across stakeholders and works with the embedded refills team on training and communication, ensuring that training is executed efficiently and effectively. They also assist with establishing the rollout plan post-go live. Finally, we have our ambulatory analyst. Now, during an implementation, we typically have several IT resources. However, the ambulatory analyst is the one constant role that we have. This is our primary technical resource for the implementation. They help us ensure project timelines are met by completing the build and testing in a timely manner, and they're also responsible for ensuring that all testing criteria passes before build is moved to production. On the embedded refill side, we also have some members involved with the implementation. First, we have our implementation manager, and as the title suggests, this person is responsible for the overall success of the implementation. They're the first person that stakeholders will work with once the implementation starts. They're responsible for helping align resources with the customer, setting up kickoff calls, and also leading that protocol consensus. They're there to see the project through go live. Then we have our technical success manager or TSM, and this is somebody that would come from my team. They're responsible for both the technical implementation as well as maintenance post go live. They help identify what resources will be needed and put together the alignment and kickoff call for the IT group. They provide all materials needed for the implementation, and once the customer is live, they're still involved with any ongoing maintenance and success of embedded refills with the customer, helping to assist with any troubleshooting as well as providing any updates to the protocols. So all of those hours that IT would typically spend on building protocols that Jessica mentioned before without embedded refills can now be put towards other projects because we are doing the lift to provide those updated recommendations. Then we have our customer success manager or CSM, and this is somebody from Jessica's team. This person is responsible for the ongoing success, analytic dashboards, and optimization. Once a customer is live on its pilot sites, the implementation manager will transition the work over to the CSM. The CSM is typically introduced during the implementation to get to know the stakeholders and also to become a familiar face, but they're not as actively involved until post-go live. Following the go live, if there's any desired updates or changes to the protocols or workflow, the CSM will take the lead on these. Finally, we have some behind-the-scene resources, and these are resources that customers typically won't see, but we would be remiss not to call them out. First and foremost, we have our clinical content team. This is the team that maintains the protocols in our system for over 950 medications. They're responsible for reviewing any medication recommendation changes and making sure our protocols are always up to date with the latest recommendations. If a medication is recalled or if there's a brand new medication on the market, the clinical content team will notify the CSM so that that information can be shared with customers. They also put together bi-yearly release notes and updates to our protocols, which we will always implement into our system, and then we will deliver those release notes to our customers so that they can choose whether they want to implement those updates as well. Finally, this is the team we reach out to with any medication requirement questions or just any medication clarification that we may need. We also have our analytics team, and they're responsible for taking our data files we receive from our customers and turning them into an interactive dashboard for our end users to review. Jessica is going to go over this dashboard in a few slides. Finally, we have our product and engineering teams. These teams are responsible for updating any functionality with our product. So if the CSM or TSM receives a feature request from a customer, we will work together with our product and engineering teams to determine if the feature is feasible and also to help prioritize. So probably the biggest question we always get, what EMRs is embedded refills compatible with? First, we have Epic. With Epic, we actually harness native functionality. If you're currently an Epic customer, you may be familiar with the green checks and red X's that currently appear with medications in the in basket. Our protocols appear the exact same way. However, we are providing all of that content for those protocols. We build the protocols in our system, and then we generate an import that we then provide to the ambulatory analyst. Upon generating this import, it also generates the majority of all of the protocol records that are needed for these protocols to fire. With Cerner, we have a direct integration to Health Catalyst APIs, which is driven by Cerner Ops jobs. We work together with the IT team of the customer in order to create the ops jobs, and we also provide program and code so that the protocols can appear in the patient chart. Once all of the build is in place, the refills send to us, we process and generate recommendations, and then we send them back to Cerner, which then surface as a protocol for the end users to review. For Athena and Veradigm, we see a much shorter implementation than Epic and Cerner implementations, and therefore my team is actually not involved in these since they are so much quicker to do. Similar to Cerner, they have a direct integration to us with APIs. They send us the refill requests, we process and generate a recommendation, and we send that protocol back so that it can surface in the chart. So looking at the timeline, first we need to identify those resources. As discussed, we have our clinical resources that are crucial. That's our provider champion, our nursing or pharmacy champion, and project sponsor. On the technical side, along with that ambulatory analyst, sometimes we'll have a project manager. This totally depends on the resources available at a customer, but it is always very helpful to have a project manager since they can help us with aligning the resources, scheduling meetings, making sure we're on track with the project plan. However, we have implemented many times without a project manager, in which case either the implementation manager or the TSM on the embedded refill side will take over that role. There's also additional technical resources based on the integration. For Epic, for example, it may be desired to have a Willow or a Beaker analyst involved. For Cerner, there may be a programmer or an architect. It really all depends on how roles are defined at an organization and who owns the areas of build. Following that, we need to schedule the necessary meetings. On the clinical side, we have that alignment call to determine those resources, the kickoff call to go over the project timeline, and then the protocol consensus where we review the build that will go into the protocols. On the technical side, we have our alignment call again to identify our IT resources and also to have our IT kickoff call. During this call, that's where we can set our expectations of the timeline for the project and also schedule weekly check-ins that we will use, which give us the opportunity to discuss any build questions, do some ad hoc testing, or identify any roadblocks in the project. Following that, we have our IT build and our protocol consensus, and depending on the integration, these steps could potentially be done together in tandem. The IT build is led by the Embedded Refills TSM, and we provide step-by-step guidance along with resources for a successful implementation. We have a build guide, integration guide, build tracker, project plan, and even a test script that we provide for the implementation. The protocol consensus is led by the Embedded Refills implementation manager. Protocol consensus typically takes about 8 hours of review and is broken into several different meetings. We review all of the different protocols that our team provides. Now, this sounds very daunting, but we are very efficient at what we do, and this is where we see how important it is to have a provider champion involved. Also, we have found that too many hands in the pot can cause delays with the protocol consensus. Now, with Cerner, we can complete the IT build at the same time as protocol consensus because the Cerner build is not dependent on that consensus. However, for Epic, we do depend on protocol consensus since we need the protocol build done to generate that import. So typically, we wait for that to be completed. If we do see there are delays, maybe protocol consensus is taking longer than expected, then we can try to work with the analyst to start developing some of the records. But for the most part, we need that protocol consensus to be completed. Then we move on to our workflow consensus, and this is led by the Embedded Refills Implementation Manager. This is where we define and standardize the refill workflows. Maybe the customer is going from a decentralized model to a centralized model, or vice versa. Or maybe they're not changing their model at all, but just protocols will be brand new to the staff. Whatever the situation may be, the implementation manager works with the team to make sure that the workflow is defined so that staff are able to work through medications using embedded refills as efficiently as possible. From there, we can wrap up the build and testing, and this is led by both Embedded Refills TSM and the implementation manager. This is where configuration is completed and the end-to-end user testing can be done. A test script is provided by the embedded refills team to ensure that the scenarios are thoroughly tested. If there's any last-minute tweaks or updates identified, perhaps there's a protocol that we want to add an additional lab check to, or an office visit check needs to be reduced from 12 months to 6 months, this is the time we want to make those last updates. From there, we can move on to training, and this is led by the Embedded Refills Implementation Manager. We also have our user acceptance, which is our final testing session to have that sign off on the protocol content as well as the workflow. We want to have our training and communication plan well developed. The Embedded Refills team has training materials that can be tailored to an organization's needs, and we can also provide training to the staff. This could be a lunch and learn, a meeting before or after patient care hours, one-on-one virtual training, whatever works best for the staff. Some organizations do have their own training team and prefer that they own the training, and this is perfectly fine, but we are always available to help assist however needed. Finally, we have our go live, and the big day is here. This is led by Embedded Refills TSM and Implementation Manager. We coordinate the build move to production and make sure any change management policies are being followed. We also establish our go live support model. This could be a day-long bridge line, a midday and end-of-day check-in, whatever the customer prefers so that they feel supported but not overwhelmed. As previously mentioned, we typically do start with a pilot site and then roll out to additional departments, clinics, and providers following that pilot. So putting it all together, here's a general mock-up of what that timeline will look like. You'll see all the different steps broken down by weeks. For Epic and Cerner, we typically look at about 12 to 16 weeks for an implementation. Athena and Veradigm are about half of that since their integration is not as complex. The biggest challenges we see with staying on track with timelines is resource availability and protocol consensus. For resources, it could be that the clinical staff are ready to go, but the IT department may already have all of their projects defined for the year, so their resources could be tight. We also need to consider any system upgrades or other major projects that could affect when our product could go live. With protocol consensus, we've mentioned the importance of the provider champion several times. This person is necessary for protocol consensus to be successful, but it is also important to keep the group small and concise. Otherwise, it is very difficult to reach decisions. Finally, we cannot stress enough that once a customer is live, Embedded Refills team does not go anywhere. We are providing that continued optimization and maintenance support well after go live.
Emily, do you mind reiterating? I think you spoke of it a little bit, but we have a question about if we have standard best practice protocols to start with rather than starting from scratch.
Yes, absolutely. So Jessica mentioned we have a medication library of over 950 medications. So we have protocols already built for those. When a customer does go live, the implementation manager will share those with them, and then customers can decide if they want to make changes. So for example, if they see a protocol and they say, no, we typically look for creatinine for this as well, we can absolutely add that. So what we have is not written in stone. We can modify it to the customer's needs.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Alrighty, I'm going to talk through post-live support now. So like Emily mentioned, once you've gone live on Embedded Refills, a customer success manager from my team will support you going forward. We utilize a ticketing portal for all support requests. This could be protocol updates or requests for optimizations. Maybe you need access granted to the data dashboard, or if you have an idea for a feature request, you would upload it here. You also have the ability to add screenshots to assist in troubleshooting your request. Your CSM will set up check-ins to ensure that your goals are being met, and so you can review data together. Again, twice a year, the clinical content team provides release notes detailing the latest updates to protocol recommendations. And at that time, you can work with your CSM to either adopt or modify these recommendations. Alongside the Embedded Refills product, we utilize a Health Catalyst analytics tool called Pop Insights. So you'll be granted access to this dashboard to monitor and track operational performance. The dashboard tab is the main tab of Pop Insights, and this is where you can interact with the dashboard. You can view or create or favorite a dashboard. You can set date ranges, apply filters, like if you wanted to drill down to one specific authorizing provider. And you can also publish a report of the dashboard that you're viewing to share maybe with some colleagues. In this screenshot example here, you can see refill volume over a certain period of time. You can see the number of providers live on embedded refills, and then the protocol outcomes graph. This graph shows for each month the percentage of refills that fell into each refill bucket category that we spoke of earlier. And this is where you and your CSM can complete a deep dive and review more granular data and really let that data tell the story. For example, we want in protocol, which is the purple section, to be the highest percentage. And if it's not, we can determine top protocols that are falling out of protocol to either adjust those protocols to ensure they are aligned with how our providers are actually practicing, or we can use that time to educate our providers to remind them, for instance, to order that missing lab that continues to flag, like we originally decided during protocol consensus to safely refill that medication. The more in protocol refills, the more refills that can be completed by someone other than the provider. Also, some EMRs provide us with additional data, and that allows us to show items like delegation rate, turnaround time by day, and centralized refill team productivity. Our analytics dashboard is updated on a monthly cadence. Before going live, the implementation manager will work with you to establish baseline metrics and goals. Here are some commonly seen goals accomplished by our clients. 75% or more, this is the percent of renewals handled by staff. So this relates back to provider time saving, delegating as many refills off of the provider as possible. Second is a 24 to 48 hours turnaround time. With some very efficient groups, we actually see a less than 24-hour turnaround time. And the last piece here is one staff member can support the bandwidth of up to 30 providers. Typically before embedded refills, that ratio is one staff member to support about 7 to 10 providers. Now let's get into workflows. So we see decentralized and centralized workflows. A decentralized workflow is when there are no dedicated staff for refill requests, but the staff is handling refill requests amongst other tasks. So maybe they're also triaging, they're also rooming patients. A centralized workflow occurs when there are staff that are fully dedicated to refill requests. Sometimes organizations are decentralized with a goal of centralizing after implementing embedded refills, but really we've found success with both models. Without embedded refills, the refill workflow starts when a renewal request is received. Again, that can be via phone, fax, e-prescribed. Then, if a protocol has been established, the refill user reviews the protocol, which is normally documented on paper and can differ by provider or specialty. Then they check the chart for relevant information, and then they approve or send to the provider for final approval. The average minutes spent per renewal request without the help of embedded refills is about 1.5 minutes for providers and 6 minutes for staff. So it is time consuming, and it also has that ability for human error. Some organizations do not have protocols in place at all, and only providers refill all medications that come through. With embedded refills, the renewal is received, a protocol is auto-applied, and the refill message populates. The refill user can then quickly review and either approve or deny, cutting that time into fractions. With embedded refills, the average time spent on refills significantly decreases to less than 1 minute for providers and around 2 minutes for staff by streamlining the refill process and clinical workflow. And I have some specific examples that I wanted to share today. We had a decentralized group who started with us, and all providers at that time were doing all refills. After implementing, they stayed decentralized, but have all of their medical assistants completing 90% of refills now. Another group went from a decentralized to a centralized model. and increased their refills completed per day from 80 to 250. And then lastly, another group was already centralized, but they were able to decrease their turnaround time from 48 hours to 15.5 hours. Now that you know what embedded refills is, I'm going to share a couple case studies recently published that yielded fantastic results. First, we have Unity Point Health. They were looking for a solution to improve efficiency, to streamline provider and staff workflow, and to reduce medication refill labor burden. The refill staff worked with the providers to determine which requests the central team should manage and which requests, such as requests for controlled substances, should be routed to the provider for review. The refill team established a patient handoff process, ensuring that patients who have outstanding care, such as lab tests or results, receive that needed care. Unity Point successfully increased medication refill efficiency and decreased labor costs while maintaining accuracy. They're increasing the amount of time providers and clinic staff can spend with patients. Their medication refill requests that are managed by the centralized team are now processed in just 1.5 minutes. And next we have Community Health Network, or CHNW. They needed to evaluate current practices and standardize medication refills for primary care, reducing the burden on providers and staff. After implementing and optimizing embedded refills, CHNW achieved significant results. Reduced time spent on refills, over 13,000 provider labor hours and 102 staff hours. Their turnaround time of more than half of all meds are processed same day, and 3.4 million in cost savings. So again, another prime example of utilizing embedded refills. And if you want to learn more, you can read the full article on the Health Catalyst website. I hope you gained insight on all things embedded refills today, and please let us know if you have any questions.
So Jessica, we did have one question about the labs and vitals, for example, and if we're able to mark them as out of range to mark for further review. So the answer to this question is yes. Depending on the EMR, it's going to surface a little differently. So for Epic, for example, if there's a blood pressure or a lab that is out of range, it'll show with a red X, and then there's a hyperlink that you click on for more information to see exactly where that level was. Otherwise, if you have a level set, it may say within the display text, like within the range, but you still need to click that hyperlink for the actual value. If it's something like Cerner, it'll appear at red text and it'll tell you that the blood pressure was a certain value when it should be something else, and that alerts the end user that way with that EMR that the blood pressure or lab is out of range.
Thank you. And I'm seeing another question here. Any difference between how requests arriving via e-prescribing, faxing, and patient cases, so we're talking about Athena, are handled? So they are handled differently. So anything that comes in via SureScripts or e-prescribing, that protocol is automatically applied. With Athena, we have a workflow for faxes because we need to ensure that we have the discrete data that can pull in that SIG, that quantity. But then it ends up after you enter that discrete data, it flips, it processes, and then it produces a refill message. As for patient cases, I believe those are more so like free text that you can send over through a portal. So I am not, I believe it's similar to the faxes where we still need to have somebody manually enter the patient information in order for us to process it and trigger that refill message to show.
Okay. And then we also had a question of how do we handle lab values that are scanned into the patient's EMR? So as long as they're entered discretely, we're able to match to that value. This is a question we do get a lot, especially with Epic and Care Everywhere values. If the value is not discrete, we're not going to be able to recognize it. And that's not something with just refills. That's something with other areas of the EMR as well, unfortunately. But if there is a process already in place where they receive an outside lab and they enter that lab somehow discretely, the protocol will fire based on that entry.
Do we have any other questions from the audience? Give it a few minutes for those last questions to come through.
Okay, so we had another question about whether protocols can distinguish a qualifying visit versus an acute visit for an illness where meds weren't addressed. Yes, when we do the protocol build, that is one thing that the implementation manager will go over with the group of what types of visits should qualify. So this could be based on visit type or encounter type, even provider or department type. We do recommend not going as granular as provider, but we can have that built however you would like it so that it's firing for the appropriate visits.
All right, Emily, Jessica, are you able to answer the other two, or do we want to answer those offline after we gather some more information?
Yeah, I think we'll have to gather some more information regarding the staffing ratio.
Okay. So Michelle, we'll touch base with you through email on that one as our speakers get a little bit more information, either from you or from their team, to be able to respond appropriately. All right, and then we had a question from Leslie. Are we able to answer that live, or do we want to email her as well?
Yeah, I'd like to email Leslie. I want to say we're able to, but would hate to misspeak and speak in absolute. So we'll reach out to you as well.
And then Casey, I see you asked about process linked to diagnosis in visits. This one I think would be trickier to do. We do look at diagnosis like problem list for certain things, diabetes especially, but with actual office visits, I think that would be a little bit trickier. I think it's something we could look into, but at this time we don't have customers looking specifically at diagnosis for visits, just like type of visits or who the visit was with.
All right, great. Well, it looks like we've answered all of the questions currently, and Leslie and Michelle will get in touch with you offline. So thank you again for everyone joining. I'm going to run one final poll asking if you would like to learn more about Health Catalyst products and services, specifically embedded refills. We can put you in touch with someone. So this poll will only take 2 minutes. But we want to thank all of you for joining us today, and we do hope you enjoyed the presentation. As a reminder, the on-demand webinar recording and slides will be shared with you tomorrow. You can always reach out to us through email or our website if you have further questions or comments. And on behalf of all of us here at Health Catalyst, thank you again for joining us today, and have a great rest of your day. Thank you.